President Biden out in force and throwing down the gauntlet against these new, severe and at times unhinged right-wing backlashes to the big news that changed everything for COVID in America yesterday, a vaccine mandate. And the president and first lady were at a school today talking about childhood safety, what kids are going through, the masking, the safety measures, the challenges that all these families have had across the country as we deal with COVID in schools and an unvaccinated population of children. The president making it very clear what he thinks about Republican governors backing policies that he says put our nation's children at risk.
Are calling your vaccine requirements an overreach. You are threatening to challenge it in court.
Have at it. Look, I am so disappointed that particularly some of the Republican governors have been so cavalier with the health of these kids, so cavalier with the health of their communities. We're playing for real here. This isn't a game.
Cavalier about the health of communities and the people dying. Now, Republican governors in several states are threatening lawsuits. That goes to a big question that is on the mind of many Americans. Can the president do this? Does he have these legal powers? There is an actual answer, and I want to tell you we're going to begin with our breaking news coverage and our experts, but I have a special legal report we've been working on the precedents for Biden's mandates coming up in a few minutes on this program. So if you're interested in the answer to that, we're going to get into it. Just facts, just legal facts. Now, as for the news, which is what leads our show, 75% of the country is partially vaccinated. That means they've gotten at least one shot. And the president today said something that also is backed by a lot of data. There's been a lot of talk about MAGA and protests and what some people think about vaccines, but a lot of data shows the public does support safety measures and mandates by big margins, which is the context for the president saying this, that the American people are with him.
We got to come together. And I think the vast majority, look at the polling data, the vast majority of the American people know we have to do these things. They're hard, but necessary.
The poll of swing state voters that came out last month speaks to this. Over 60% in each state backing the employer vaccine mandate. You see all those sixes. That's a much higher margin than other political issues, including the presidential election. And those are swing states. Biden's mandates could affect up to 100 million people in America. So this is a big deal. This is no small ball. It's also an emergency step that many scientists have said is needed precisely because of the lagging rates of vaccination and a pandemic that is killing thousands every day. Now, there's a long history to this, and much of it goes against the critics who are arguing that any of this is somehow new or an overreach or un-American. Take this quote from George Washington that was going around today. This is a letter that he wrote in 1777 about smallpox, that he supports a law that compels masters of families to inoculate every child born within a certain limited time under severe penalties. And as we end a long week, I ask you, America, what is more American than George Washington himself? Maybe I'll take that question to our experts, because as promised, we're going to do the breaking coverage before I get to our legal breakdown, and I'm joined by Jason Johnson from Morgan State University, an MSNBC contributor, and Katty Kay, Washington editor with Aussie Media. Jason, I wouldn't say George Washington was right about everything, and I would say science has evolved since then. But for at least those who want to suggest, and we have more on this tonight, that Joe Biden is crossing some new line and doing something tyrannical and un-American, what do you think of a little bit of George to start the evening here, and the wider context of who's telling the truth?
Well, I mean, the wider context, Ari, has always been, all you got to do is ask people, how'd you go to elementary school? I mean, if you're over the age of 25, 30, if you've been to school, you had to get vaccinated against certain diseases to go to school. So, you know, Joe Biden is not overreaching. Joe Biden is not pushing any sort of limit. He's not breaking any precedent. You can go back to 1905. There's Supreme Court rulings on these kinds of issues. What's key, though, I think, about what he did yesterday and the fallout is he's putting his foot down. Because he recognizes that without a federal mandate, without a vaccine mandate coming from the federal government with the stick, because we've already had the carrot of we will snatch money back from your districts if you don't handle this. It was the only way you could get enough people vaccinated so this country can actually get out of this pandemic.
Yeah, and you mentioned the carrots, Caddy. We've had enough carrots to get Bugs Bunny drunk. I mean, they were giving out shots and beers. They were giving out $100, $200 in some places, different programs and localities. On the policy matrix, there's been a lot of carrots, a lot of sweeteners, a lot of TikTok videos, a lot of, hey, this is fun, this is good, and they've had it. And I want to ask you, Caddy, we're going to get to the law, as I mentioned, in a minute. I want to ask you about leadership and the ability to change one's mind, because you have studied and been up close with so many politicians and presidents, Caddy. Let's be clear. Joe Biden publicly did not want to do this. This was not plan A. There are trade-offs to any policy, and they had hoped to get to the medically required rates of herd vaccination and immunity without this. And we know that because I want to play for context again, whether people think this makes him look good or bad or just able to change his mind. As president-elect, here's what he said.
No, I don't think it should be mandatory. I do everything in my power as the President of the United States to encourage people to do the right thing.
This new policy from Biden yesterday uses employer power for something that is much closer to mandatory with a testing exception. Caddy, walk us through what you see here in a president changing his mind during an emergency.
I think the second part of that sentence is really important as well, right? I will do everything in my power to encourage people to get the vaccine. And that is what the White House has done over the course of the last 8 months. So two things have happened. They tried to get everyone to get vaccines, and you have, by Western standards, an incredibly high rate of people who didn't want to listen to that encouragement, who didn't want to follow the carrot, right? So the White House felt, and maybe there's something to do with approval ratings in the timing, I'm not convinced by that. They just felt that the numbers of people who are not getting the vaccine is too stubbornly high in this country. Europe, which lagged behind the United States, has now overtaken the US in the numbers of people getting vaccinated because you don't have that large group of people who just say no. The other thing, of course, that happened is the Delta variant, right? The president felt that he didn't want to mandate vaccines. That was before Delta. That was before we saw this surge in hospitalizations and health systems in particularly southern states being overwhelmed. So the facts changed, and the president and maybe Joe Biden should have come out and said, listen, I hoped I wouldn't have to have done this. I said I was hoping not to have to do this, but now the circumstances have changed. Maybe that would have helped. I don't think it would have made much difference to those people who are adamantly not going to get vaccines, but that's what happened.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that context. And Jason, we've talked about partisanship. Everyone knows things are polarized. But I want to be clear. I always want to be as accurate as possible, even if it is a more complex story or less exciting to some. There are Republican governors who are strongly pro-vaccine, just the way Biden was yesterday. And that doesn't always get the same attention. I just want to play some of that because there is divisions among conservatives around the country. Take a look at some Republican governors saying it is time to get vaccinated.
It's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks. It's the unvaccinated folks that are letting us down.
And if you're not vaccinated, you're part of the problem rather than part of the solution. For God's sakes a living, how difficult is this to understand? Why in the world do we have to come up with these crazy ideas, and they're crazy ideas, that the vaccine's got something in it and it's tracing people wherever they go? And the same very people that are saying that are carrying their cell phones around. I mean, come on.
The West Virginia governor there's had enough. I feel him on the conspiracy theories. I respect people's personal decisions, but I don't really respect people in a wealth of information believing things that are flatly false. I think that's unfortunate. But Jason, what do you think here about what some of these Republican governors are also saying?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's great, but I don't really praise people for just engaging in common sense. They should have been saying that all along. In fact, once you empowered people, really this went back to last year, Ari, once you empowered people to say no to common sense, they were going to dig in. So even if those same governors now are saying, yes, you need to get vaccinated, and yes, it's going to be important, you already gave people enough rope for them to go running through the streets with their ridiculous behavior. And that's why, again, when we go back to Biden, yes, this wasn't plan A, B, but now we're at plan Delta, and now we're at plan Mu, and now we may be at plan Gamma going down the road. They're going to have to get more and more strict in the United States in order to just have a sort of hit an even plane. We're not winning the battle at this particular point. You've got more people dying in some states than they were at this point last year before the vaccine. So it's kind of too little too late for these governors. I hope they take this seriously and enforce mandates and penalties on businesses at their state level. Otherwise, it's just easy talk.
Caddy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the other argument that needs to be made is that this is an economic argument. The United States is being hit economically by this. It might be an argument that some of these Republican governors might feel more comfortable marshalling. I was interviewing a top economist today who said, thank goodness the Biden administration came out as tough as it did last night, because we were looking at a great recovery. We were looking at jobs numbers growing, and actually that circumstance has changed too. And it is related to the Delta variant and to the numbers of people that aren't getting vaccinated. It might be something that Republican governors feel comfortable talking about.
Yeah. And Jason, was it not Kendrick Lamar who said, I'm the vaccine, the game needs me to survive?
If the American economy is supposed to survive, we're going to have to be much wiser, much smarter, and follow everything that Joe Biden has laid out for us, as Kendrick would, of course, agree with.
Of course.
Respect. Favorite Kendrick song, Jason?
Gosh, what's the one? This is actually missing me right now. His soundtrack, all the stuff he did on the soundtrack for Black Panther was fantastic. That's actually my favorite. I wasn't a massive Kendrick-specific album, but the soundtrack was great.
There was a lot of good on the Black Panther soundtrack, and the other soundtrack that came out for the movie about the Black Panthers also had Nipsey, Jay-Z.
Yes.
Do you know the one I'm talking about? What was that called? I don't remember the name of the movie now.
Jesus and the Black Messiah. Judas and the Black Messiah.
There it is.
Jesus.
There it is. You never know what's going to happen on the beat, Caddy. You never know.
You never know. I was going with
amidst
Chicago
all the-
7, but it was the wrong movie.
Related issues, though, same period of time.
Related.
The Chicago 7 film, was also super interesting. So, look, we learned from all of our cultural touchstones. Jason Johnson, thank you.